Vigilant, the Night Guardians series, by Sara Davison. Defend the weak and the fatherless. Uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. Psalm 82, verses 3 through 4. Chapter 1. Luke's eyes widened at the sight of the knife.
Hold out your hand like this.
His older brother Ben held up his palm. Luke's breath came in short gasps as he lifted a pale, shaking hand into the air over his crossed legs.
Ready?
Sliding one hand under Luke's to hold it still, Ben moved the knife until it hovered over the soft flesh of Luke's palm. He swallowed hard and nodded, his eyes locked on the sharp tip of the jackknife.
Look at me.
Tilting his head up to meet his brother's stare, Luke sucked in a breath as the knife pierced his skin.
All done. See?
Luke looked down at the drops of blood rising to the surface of his skin and trickling into his palm. The movement of the knife caught his eye, and he watched, fascinated, as Ben sliced a small cut into his own hand and snapped the blade shut before dropping it onto the floor. In the glimmer of light from their bedroom that shafted through the slight crack in the closet door, Ben's forehead was wrinkled in concentration. Luke suppressed a nervous giggle. Ben held out his hand. Luke pressed his palm to his brother's, the blood a damp and sticky warmth mingling between their clasped hands.
Now repeat after me. I, Luke.
The grim tone of his brother's voice squelched any desire to laugh.
I, Luke, do solemnly swear to lay down my life for my brother.
Luke looked up, his eyes narrowing in confusion.
It means you have to be willing to die for me,
Ben explained. Luke hesitated.
I'd do it for you in a minute, Luke. We have to take care of each other.
He nodded. That much he understood. Even though his brother was just 10, 3 years older than Luke, Ben was the only one who had ever taken care of him.
To lay down my life for my brother, and to always be there for him, no matter what.
Luke repeated the words, a powerful feeling growing inside him like a balloon expanding in his chest. He wasn't sure what it was, but he knew the words they were saying to each other carried a special magic. When Ben repeated the words, the feeling grew so strong that tears welled in his eyes. Turning his head, he wiped them away quickly with the worn thin sleeve of his train-covered pajama top. Ben squeezed his fingers.
Now we're not just brothers, we're blood brothers. That's even better, stronger. Means we'll always be together, and we'll always keep each other safe, okay?
Okay. The front door slammed. Panic swept over Ben's face, but he pushed back his shoulders, trying, like Luke knew he always did, to look brave.
Ron, no!
Ben's grip on Luke's hand tightened as their mother cried out from downstairs.
Out of my way!
The sound of a fist smacking flesh hurt Luke's ears as if he had taken the blow himself. He winced. A kitchen chair crashed to the floor. Their mother didn't make another sound. Ben pushed onto his knees. He didn't look scared now. He looked mad. Luke's heart sank.
Ben, don't go. You can't help Mom. When you try, it makes things worse.
His brother's breaths came out in short, angry gasps, but he didn't leave, only peered through the small crack in the closet door. Luke tugged on his hand.
Maybe someone will come and help us,
he whispered. Ben whipped around to face him. Closing the fingers of his free hand around Luke's upper arm, he shook him.
Stop saying that. No one's coming to help us. You know that. No one ever comes. It's just you and me.
Heavy boots tromped up the stairs. Ben let go of Luke's arm and raised a finger to his lips. Luke nodded. If they were really quiet, their dad might not find them. Maybe he wouldn't come into their room tonight. Sometimes he left them alone and went into his own room. Luke slid the hand not clutching Ben's behind his back and crossed his fingers tightly. The bedroom door flew open. Luke's stomach tightened. A cry rose in his throat, and he bit his bottom lip hard to keep the sound inside.
Where are you?
Objects clattered off the walls. Luke jumped as something heavy thudded against the door of the closet. Still holding his brother's hand, he pressed against the wall behind him. He and Ben didn't have a lot of clothes, and what they had they usually tossed over a wooden chair in the corner of their room, so only bare hangers hung from the rod above their heads.
Make us invisible. Make us invisible.
He held his hand in front of his face. Blood dripped down his wrist. His throat tightened. No one ever answered his plea or prayer or whatever it was. Ben was right. They were on their own. Their father flung open the closet door so hard it crashed against the wall. "There you are." The smell of whiskey filled the air so strong Luke's eyes stung. Ben shrank back beside him as his dad's arm clawed through the air. "Get out here."
Ben!
Luke cried out in desperation as his dad grasped his brother's arm and yanked hard. Luke held onto Ben's hand as tightly as he could, but his dad was too strong, and Ben's fingers slid from his. Luke doubled over and buried his face in the stained, threadbare carpet. The musty smell clogged his nostrils. His thin shoulders shook with sobs.
"You come when I call. You hear me, boy?"
Luke squeezed his eyes shut at the sharp smack of a hand against bare skin. His brother cried out. Luke pushed himself upright. Something cold and hard pressed into his stinging palm. His hand closed over it. The jackknife. He stared at it for a moment, then swiped the tears off his cheeks with the knuckles of his trembling hand. His fingers tightened around the handle of the knife as he fumbled with the blade.
"We're blood brothers now. It means we'll always be together, and we'll always keep each other safe."
Luke pushed back his own shoulders, trying to make himself feel brave. The knife helped a little. Gritting his teeth, he struggled to his feet. Across the room, his dad swung a clenched fist and smashed it hard into Ben's face. Ben staggered backward, and his head cracked against the metal footboard of the small cot. He fell to the floor with a hard thud and lay still. The knot in Luke's stomach grew tighter as blood seeped slowly into the carpet beneath his brother's head.
"That'll teach you."
Ben moaned and tried to roll over. Their father aimed a boot at his face.
"No!"
Luke sprinted across the room and raised the knife. Before his father could react, he swiped the blade as hard as he could across his dad's arm.
"What the—"
Curse words filled the air. Luke skidded to a stop. A line of blood crawled across his father's forearm. He didn't see his dad's other hand shoot out until strong fingers gripped his small wrist. Pain slithered up and down his arm like a writhing snake. The knife fell from his hand, taking with it the small amount of courage he had mustered. He stared into his father's dark, wild eyes.
"I'll kill you, you little—"
Letting go of Luke's wrist, his father wrapped large, calloused hands around his neck. Luke struggled to breathe but couldn't draw in air. His father increased the pressure until black spots shimmered in front of Luke's eyes. His hands raked empty air. The room spun around him. Suddenly his father's grip loosened. Luke dropped to the floor, coughing and gasping for breath. Holding his throbbing throat, he looked up. His father had grabbed his neck with one hand. His bloodshot eyes bulged. The bright red on his cheeks and nose faded to white. Luke pushed against the carpet with both feet and scrambled out of the way as his dad crashed to the floor. He stared at the jackknife protruding from his dad's neck. Slowly, Luke lifted his head. Ben was on his knees at their dad's feet. Blood trailed across the carpet.
"Ben?"
Pain-filled eyes met his.
"Luke,"
Ben whispered, his voice ragged.
"you okay?"
Luke nodded, then leaped toward his brother as Ben started to topple forward. He was too heavy for Luke to hold, and he struggled to lower Ben to the floor and over onto his side.
"Ben, wake up!"
Luke shook him by the shoulder. Ben didn't open his eyes. Luke sank to the floor beside him. Grasping his brother's hand, he pressed it against his own blood-stained palm, rocking back and forth. Tears slid down his cheeks, dripping onto their clasped fingers. His brother was gone, and so was the magic. He was completely alone. Chapter 2. Nicole Hunter nudged the vase of pink plastic daisies in the middle of the table aside and swiped at a pile of crumbs with a damp cloth. The diner was quiet tonight. The last of the customers in her section had finished their burgers and fries and gone 10 minutes earlier, although the aroma of hot grease still hung in the air above their table. The tip they'd left her wasn't worth much more than the crumbs she'd gathered in the cloth. She sighed. Given the nasty February blizzard that had swooped in and ground life in the city to a halt, it wasn't likely there'd be many more people in tonight. She'd have to grab an extra shift on the weekend if she wanted to indulge in anything frivolous in the next few weeks.
"Like eating."
A wry grin crossed Nicole's face as she palmed the 2 quarters and slipped them into her apron pocket, then leaned across the table to take care of a puddle of spilled milk. No matter what, she wouldn't go hungry. She worked hard to earn enough to make ends meet, refusing to rely on the money her parents sent her every month. That would mean admitting the payment was a fair trade for their actual presence in her life. So the money sat in her account, drawing interest from the bank, if not from her. A movement outside caught her eye. Nicole straightened with a groan and pushed a hand into her lower back. She caught her reflection and wrinkled her nose at the freckles sprinkled across it. Would she ever outgrow those? She tucked a strand of blonde hair that had come loose from her ponytail behind one ear as she peered out through the lacework of frost etched across the large front window of Joe's diner. Wet, heavy snow fell from the sky, covering Toronto in a thick blanket of white that faded to soot gray almost as soon as it landed on the streets and sidewalks. Nicole frowned.
"Connie,"
she twisted her head to call out over her shoulder.
"your friends are on their way."
Joe's wife, her short gray hair neatly covered in a net, pushed through the swinging kitchen doors and out into the diner, wiping her hands on a towel.
"The boys coming, sweetie?"
Nicole's lips twitched. Although it was a bit tricky assessing the ages of the men trooping over from the homeless shelter, most of them had to be about Connie's age or not much younger than her 70 years. Still, she always called them the boys with such affection in her voice it was clearly a term of endearment to her. Respect, even. Nicole turned back and narrowed her eyes, trying to distinguish between the snow-covered shapes huddled together as they passed beneath the dim glow of the streetlight on the corner.
"Yep, looks like 4 or 5 of them."
Connie tossed her towel below the cash register and glanced at the clock above the door.
"Almost 8. Right on time."
She pulled a pot from the coffee maker on the counter.
"They'll be looking for this, with all that snow coming down."
She lifted the pot in Nicole's direction.
"Sure you don't want to help them tonight?"
Nicole bit her lip. It wouldn't kill her to take a turn waiting on the group of men that wound up at Joe's most nights looking for hot coffee and a warm smile. Connie served both as naturally as she breathed. As good as Nicole had become at pouring coffee, though, she'd never been able to master the other, not for the unkempt people that trudged in sporting several layers of clothes and several more layers of grime.
"Do it, Nicole. Don't be such a coward."
Nicole sighed as she grabbed the pile of dirty dishes from her table and swung around to face Connie.
"Do you think you can handle them tonight? I'll take these dishes to the kitchen and see if Joe needs any help."
Connie's bright blue eyes didn't lose their sparkle, although her shoulders drooped a little.
"Maybe next time."
"Sure." Nicole leaned in to press a kiss to the soft, papery cheek of the woman who had all but adopted her after she started working at the diner.
"Next time."
Connie tugged the pencil she always teased Nicole for carrying around with her old-school style loose from behind Nicole's ear and held it out to her.
"Joe can handle the kitchen, Nick. Why don't you go home? Your shift was supposed to end a couple of hours ago."
Nicole shook her head as she took the pencil from her friend.
"I'm okay. I can stick around as long as you need me." "We'll be fine. With this weather, no one else is likely to come in. Go home. Get some rest."
"Well, if you're sure." It had been a long day since she'd started at 7 that morning.
"I'm sure."
"All right, then." Nicole saluted her friend with the pencil before turning to head to the kitchen.
"I'll see you tomorrow."
The jangle of bells stopped her short. As the men she had seen coming down the sidewalk spilled into the diner, Nicole jumped back between 2 tables. She clutched the dishes tightly as the men swept by. The last man through the door stopped long enough to remove a rumpled fedora from his head and dip his chin. "Ma'am?" Nicole nodded and watched him as he made his way toward the rear of the diner where Connie poured steaming coffee into mugs. With her eyes still on the corner table, Nicole stepped into the aisle and right into a tall man dressed in a long black coat, damp from the falling snow. When his hands instinctively cupped her shoulders, she jerked away, sending the mug on top of the pile she carried, crashing to the floor.
"I'm sorry."
The man crouched down to retrieve the broken dish. His dark, tousled hair brushed the collar of his wool coat. Warmth crept up her neck as Nicole set the rest of the dishes on a table and dropped to her knees, reaching underneath a chair for a piece that had skittered across the black and white tiles.
"My fault. I didn't see you come in."
The man straightened and held out his free hand to help her stand. Nicole hesitated before placing her hand in his. His strong fingers closed over hers, and he pulled her to her feet. After 8 years of working in the diner, she'd come up with 3 hard and fast rules to discourage unwanted male attention. Third on her list was to not hold anyone's gaze longer than necessary. Still, she found herself staring into dark, almost black eyes, unable to look away. maybe because he still had her fingers clasped in his, which incidentally fell under rule number 2, avoid physical contact at all costs. Nicole blinked rapidly and pulled her hand away. She spun around and grabbed the pile of dishes she'd set on the table and held it toward him. "Here, I'll take them." The man tipped his hand, and the pieces of ceramic clinked softly onto the top plate. She nodded in the direction of the nearly empty dining area. "Sit wherever you like. Connie will be right with you." When he didn't move, Nicole maneuvered around him and strode toward the swinging doors. Joe glanced over at her from his place at the grill as she came into the kitchen. "You all right, sweetheart?" "Yes, sure, fine. Of course." She dropped the dishes onto the counter with a thud. "I broke a mug." His forehead wrinkled. "Nothing to get upset about. It's not the first dish to break in this diner, and it won't be the last, I'm sure." "I'm not upset, only a little tired. Connie suggested I call it an early night and head home." She reached behind her, but paused midway through untying the strings of her apron. "Unless you need my help here." Joe waved his spatula through the air. "No, go. Everything's pretty much done." The doors swung open and Connie flew into the kitchen.
"Checks came today, Joe. The boys like burgers with their coffee."
"Gotcha." Joe winked at Nicole as he returned to his grill. Connie tucked a loose curl beneath her hairnet.
"Nick, I'm sorry. I know I told you to go, but if you're really okay to stay, you could take that table of 2 for me."
"2?"
"That man who came in behind the boys says he's waiting for someone. I seated him, but if you could take care of them, that would be great." "Connie, I know what you're—" Connie's smile deepened the laugh lines around her eyes. "I'm not matchmaking, honest. Not this time. I really need your help, please." Nicole's shoulders slumped. She could never refuse Connie anything. Not that she minded helping, but she knew her friend had an ulterior motive and that by staying, Nicole was playing right into her hands. With an exaggerated sigh that only served to widen Connie's smile, she retied her apron and headed for the doors. "Although,"
groaning, Nicole turned to face her friend and raised an eyebrow.
"it wouldn't hurt you to keep an open mind. He seems like a very nice man, with no ring on his finger."
With a quick glance toward the doorway, Nicole moved closer to Connie and lowered her voice. "I'm sure he's nice, but I really don't think he's my type."
"You always say that. I'm beginning to wonder if you even know what your type is."
Connie laid a comforting hand, rough and worn from years of washing dishes and waiting tables, on her arm.
"Not everyone leaves, Nick."
Nicole swallowed hard. "I know, but it's better this way. For now." She patted her friend's hand before taking a deep breath and pushing through the kitchen doors.